The rain had been falling for hours, steady and cold, turning the quiet highway into a long ribbon of shining black. Water tapped against the windshield of Daniel Carter's old pickup truck, while the wipers moved back and forth with a tired squeak. It was late, the kind of late when most houses were dark and the roads were nearly empty. Daniel kept both hands on the steering wheel and leaned forward a little, trying to see through the rain. A long shift at the warehouse had left his back sore and his eyes heavy, but he still had one more job for the night, getting home safely with the most important person in his life. In the back seat, his 7-year-old daughter Lily sat wrapped in a pink blanket. She had fallen asleep halfway through the drive. Her small backpack rested beside her, still full of school papers and crayons. Daniel glanced at her through the mirror and smiled softly. "Almost home, kiddo," he whispered even though she couldn't hear him. Being a single dad was never the life he expected, but it was the life he had. 2 years earlier, everything had changed when his wife passed away after a sudden illness. Since then it had just been Daniel and Lily. Some days were harder than others, but every morning he woke up with the same goal: make sure Lily felt safe, loved, and cared for. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky like distant drums. The rain began falling harder. Daniel slowed the truck a little. The road ahead stretched through open fields with only a few streetlights far apart from each other. It was the kind of road where nothing usually happened. That was why something unusual caught his eye. At first, it looked like a shadow near the side of the road. Then a flash of lightning lit up the area, and Daniel noticed a car parked on the shoulder. Its hazard lights blinked weakly through the rain. He frowned. Cars did not usually stop out here unless something was wrong. As he drove closer, he noticed a figure standing beside the car. Someone was outside in the rain, trying to look under the hood. Daniel's first thought was simple: that person shouldn't be out here alone. But another thought quickly followed. It's late. He had his daughter with him. Daniel slowed the truck even more as he passed a stranded car. Through the rain, he saw the person clearly for a moment. It was a woman wearing dark clothes, soaked from head to toe. The wind pushed her hair against her face while she struggled to keep the hood of the car open. He drove past. For a few seconds, he kept going, staring at the wet road ahead. Then he sighed. Daniel had never been the kind of person who could ignore someone in trouble. He looked again in the mirror at Lily sleeping peacefully in the back seat. She had no idea what was happening outside the truck. "We'll be okay," he murmured. He slowed down, made a careful turn, and drove back toward the stranded car. The hazard lights blinked again as he pulled over several feet behind it. Rain immediately hammered against the roof of the truck like handfuls of pebbles. Daniel grabbed his old jacket from the passenger seat and slipped it on. Before stepping out, he turned around and checked Lily once more. She was still asleep. "Stay right there," he said softly, even though she wasn't awake. The moment he opened the truck door, cold rain splashed onto the ground. Within seconds, his shoes were wet. The woman near the car noticed him approaching. She stepped back slightly, her body tense. "Hey!" Daniel called over the sound of the rain. "Everything okay?" Up close, he could see that she wore a dark green military uniform beneath a rain-soaked jacket. Mud covered the lower part of her boots. A small patch on her sleeve showed she was a soldier. Her face looked tired but alert. "Car died," she said. "Won't start again." Her voice was calm but cautious. Daniel nodded and looked at the open hood. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked. She hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. "Sure. I already tried a few things, but nothing worked." Daniel leaned forward and peered inside the engine area. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the hood while he checked the battery cables and wires. He was a mechanic, but years of driving an old truck had forced him to learn a few basic things. After a minute, he shook his head. "Battery looks weak," he said. "And something else might be wrong, too. Hard to tell in this weather." The soldier wiped rain from her forehead. "Figures," she muttered. Lightning flashed again across the sky, followed by a loud crack of thunder. Daniel looked down the empty road. "How long have you been here?" "About 40 minutes, she said. "Phone signal keeps dropping. Tow truck. Says it might take another hour." Daniel let out a slow breath. Standing on the side of a dark road for another hour in this weather didn't sound like a good idea. "Listen," he said, I've got my daughter in the truck. We're heading toward town. There's a small motel and a gas station about 10 minutes from here. I can give you a ride if you want to wait there." The soldier studied him carefully. Her eyes moved from his face to the truck behind him. Daniel understood the hesitation. Accepting help from strangers was never easy. "Name's Daniel," he added. "Just trying to help." She looked past him again. Through the window, she could see Lily sleeping in the back seat. The sight seemed to relax her a little. "Riley," she said. "That's my name." Daniel gave a small nod. "Nice to meet you, Riley. Though I guess the weather could be better." For the first time, she smiled slightly. "Yeah," she said. "That's one way to put it." Another gust of wind blew rain sideways across the road. Riley closed the hood of her car with a heavy thud. "All right," she said. "A ride would help." Daniel grabbed a small flashlight from his pocket and helped her collect a few things from the car. She locked the doors and took one last look at it sitting alone on the roadside. "Tow truck will find it," Daniel said. "Those hazard lights are bright enough." They hurried through the rain toward the pickup. When Riley opened the passenger door, warm air from inside the truck rushed out to meet the cold storm. She climbed in and shut the door quickly. Daniel circled around and got back behind the wheel, dripping water onto the floor mat. "Sorry about the mess," he said. "Trust me," Riley replied, catching her breath. "This is already better than standing out there." Daniel started the engine, and the truck rumbled softly back to life. As they pulled away from the stranded car, Riley glanced toward the back seat. "That's your daughter?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "Lily. She sleeps through storms like that." Daniel chuckled quietly. "She sleeps through almost anything." Riley watched the little girl for a moment. Lily's head rested against the window, still wrapped in her blanket. Something about the scene made Riley's expression soften. "You must be a brave dad," she said. Daniel shrugged slightly. "Just doing what parents do." The truck continued down the wet highway, while rain beat against the glass. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Riley said quietly, "Most people drove right past me tonight." Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "Yeah," he replied. "Storms make people want to get home faster." "Still," she said, "you turned around." Daniel thought about that for a second. "My dad used to say something," he said finally. "If you see someone stuck in the rain and you can help, you stop. That's just what decent people do." Riley looked out the window at the dark road behind them. The rain kept falling, but somehow the night didn't feel quite as cold anymore. Neither of them realized that this simple moment on a lonely road would stay in their memories for a long time. And neither of them knew that months later, one unexpected knock on a door would bring this rainy night back in a way neither could imagine. After that rainy night, life returned to its usual rhythm for both Daniel and Riley. For Daniel, mornings began early, with the smell of coffee filling the small kitchen and the sound of Lily's small feet padding across the floor. He helped her get dressed, packed her lunch, and made sure her hair was neat before sending her off to school with a hug and away from the bus. Work came next, long hours at the warehouse that left him tired, aching, but grateful for the paycheck that helped keep their small home running. Evenings were quieter, though never entirely calm. Lily had homework to finish, sometimes chores, and always questions that required patient answers. Daniel often found himself explaining simple things about life, school, and the small challenges they faced together. Their life wasn't easy, but Daniel was determined to make it loving and stable. Meanwhile, Riley returned to her duties at the military base. Days were filled with training exercises, paperwork, and the constant movement of soldiers in and out of the barracks. Yet, despite the structure and order, her mind often drifted back to that night on the rainy road. She remembered Daniel's kindness, the way he didn't hesitate to stop, and how he had treated her not as a stranger, but as a person in need, in the strict routine of her life. That memory stood out like a small light in the dark. Neither of them reached out after that night. Daniel had no way to contact her, and Riley had only a fleeting memory of a truck, a name, and a small town to work with. But the thought of that evening stayed with both of them, quietly influencing how they approached their days. Daniel often thought about how easy it would have been to keep driving that night, how easy it would have been to tell himself he was too tired, too busy, too worried about his daughter. But he hadn't. He had stopped. And even though it was a small act, he felt a quiet satisfaction knowing he had done the right thing. For Riley, that night became a story she told herself in her quiet moments, a reminder that there were still kind people in the world, even when her life felt demanding, lonely, or overwhelming. Sometimes, during late-night training shifts or long hours on duty, she thought about that man and the warmth of his truck, the calm voice, and the simple way he helped without asking for anything in return. Months went by, and life moved on. Daniel faced his own challenges. His work hours were reduced at the warehouse due to budget cuts. Bills piled up, small repairs became urgent, and the stress of managing everything alone began to weigh heavily on him. Some nights, after Lily had gone to bed, he would sit at the kitchen table staring at the bills, feeling the pressure of being both parent and provider. He often felt exhausted, but he never let it show in front of Lily. She had her world, her routines, and her happiness, and he wanted to protect that as much as he could. Riley had her own trials. Training had intensified, and new responsibilities required her to spend more time away from home, even as a few small leaves and breaks allowed her to check in on family from a distance. She struggled with the loneliness of service, missing family and friends, and at times feeling disconnected from the world outside her base. But whenever the days became heavy, she remembered Daniel's small act of kindness and the simple humanity he showed. It reminded her that even amidst a world of orders, schedules, and expectations, people could still care without expecting anything in return. One chilly evening, Daniel returned home after a long shift. The rain had returned, light and steady, tapping against the windows. Lily was curled up on the sofa with a book, a small lamp illuminating her face. She looked up and smiled as he entered. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. Daniel smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through him despite the cold outside. He kissed her forehead, placed his bag down, and went to make some dinner. The routine was simple, but it was theirs, and in those small, ordinary moments, he found comfort. That same evening, Riley was at the base, walking across the wet tarmac after training exercise. Her boots squished softly against the puddles forming on the concrete. She thought again about that rainy night, the way the man had stopped, and how, even in a brief encounter, he had made a difference. She knew that simple acts of kindness had ripple effects, though she had no idea what kind of impact it might have had on him. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that night remained unspoken and unexplored. Daniel continued to balance work, parenting, and the small moments of life that made it meaningful. Riley continued her service, always mindful of the quiet act of humanity she encountered along the way. Neither of them realized that their paths, though diverging now, would cross again in a way neither could predict. Sometimes, Daniel would think about the soldier. He wondered if she had reached her destination safely after he left. He wondered about the life she led, the challenges she faced, and whether she remembered him at all. It was a small curiosity, a human impulse to remember moments that mattered. But his life required focus on what he could control, Lily, their home, and making ends meet. For Riley, the image of Daniel's truck, the sound of the rain against the roof, and the warmth inside remained vivid. She often thought about the comfort of being helped without judgment, the feeling of being seen when she felt invisible in her duties. Those thoughts reminded her to carry forward the same kindness in her interactions with others, small gestures that could make the world a little less harsh. One evening, while Daniel helped Lily with a school project, the conversation drifted to act of kindness and helping strangers. Lily asked him why he always helped people even if it was inconvenient. Daniel paused for a moment, looking at his daughter's earnest eyes. "Because," he said gently, "sometimes a small act can mean everything to someone else. You never know what someone is going through. If you can help, even just a little, you should." Lily nodded seriously, absorbing his words. It was a lesson she would carry into her own life, simple yet profound. Meanwhile, Riley found herself volunteering for a small community project near the base. It was unrelated to her official duties, something personal she chose to do in her free time. She helped organize supplies, distribute them to families in need, and listen to their stories. Each interaction reminded her of that night on the highway and Daniel's quiet courage. It fueled her commitment to be present, to help whenever she could, and to honor that memory by being a person who could make a difference in someone's day. As time passed, the lives of Daniel and Riley seemed to exist in separate orbits, both marked by the same human values of care, kindness, and quiet perseverance. They continued to live their routines, handle their struggles, and find joy in small victories. And though they had not spoken since that rainy night, the connection remained unspoken but alive. It was a connection built on simple humanity, a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life are not planned, not expected, but happen simply because someone chose to act with compassion. The memory of that night, a brief encounter in a storm, had planted a seed in both of them that would grow quietly over time, shaping the way they viewed the world and the people around them. Daniel, in his quiet home with Lily, thought about the future and how he could make it better for her. Riley, in her uniform at the base, reflected on the small ways she could impact the lives of others. Both of them moved forward, carrying with them a story of kindness that neither fully understood yet. And somewhere in their hearts, the memory lingered, waiting for the day their paths would cross again, a day that would bring that quiet moment on the rainy highway back into the light, in a way neither could have predicted. Months had passed since that rainy night, and life continued its rhythm for Daniel and Lily. The days grew longer with the change of seasons, and the small town began to feel warmer despite the challenges that life kept throwing at them. Daniel still worked at the warehouse, often putting in extra hours when needed, and sometimes coming home exhausted. Yet, he always found the energy to spend time with Lily, helping her with schoolwork, cooking simple meals, and listening to her endless chatter about friends, dreams, and small daily adventures. Despite the routine, the weight of responsibility had begun to press harder on Daniel. Bills seemed to arrive faster than he could pay them. Repairs around the house were unavoidable and expensive. Some nights, he would sit at the kitchen table, staring at the small stack of overdue notices, feeling the strain of being the sole provider for his little family. Even so, he never let his exhaustion show to Lily. She was his world, and her sense of security was his priority. In quieter moments, Daniel found himself thinking about the rainy night again. It wasn't a memory that brought stress or regret, but rather a subtle reminder of the kindness he had been able to offer someone else. He wondered if Riley had made it safely to her destination, if life had been treating her kindly, and whether she ever thought about that brief encounter. Though he had no way of knowing, the memory lingered in his mind like a gentle echo, reminding him that a small gesture could make a big difference. Riley's life, on the other hand, had remained filled with duty, structure, and the occasional loneliness that came from service. She spent long hours on the base, training new recruits, attending meetings, and fulfilling responsibilities that never seemed to end. Yet, even in the midst of the strict routines, her mind often returned to that night on the highway. The image of Daniel's pickup, the warm light inside, and the quiet reassurance he offered stayed with her. It reminded her that even in the world of orders, drills, and regulations, there were moments of genuine human kindness that could make all the difference. Her thoughts of Daniel also inspired her in small ways. When she had free moments, she would go out her way to help others. A fellow soldier struggled with a task, a neighbor who needed an errand run, or even strangers she encountered during her brief trips to town. Each time, she remembered the simple act of compassion she had received that night and tried to mirror it, knowing how meaningful it could be. One evening, Daniel returned home later than usual. The warehouse had required overtime, and he had barely enough energy to carry Lily's backpack upstairs. But when he entered the house, he found her sitting at the table, drawing quietly. She looked up and smiled, holding up a colorful picture she had made of the two of them in a park. Feeding ducks. Daniel's heart warmed. "That's beautiful, Lily," he said. "I love it." "You do?" she asked eagerly. "Of course. It's perfect," he said, ruffling her hair gently. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Daniel sat alone on the couch. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. He thought about the struggles they faced, the sleepless nights, the bills, and the constant effort to make ends meet. Yet, amid it all, he felt a quiet sense of pride. He was doing the best he could. And he had Lily, who brought so much joy into his life. Far away, Riley was walking back to her quarters after a long day of training. The sky was dark, and the streetlights cast long reflections on the wet pavement. She paused for a moment, glancing at the rain-soaked streets, and thought about how much that night on the highway had stayed with her. She remembered the warmth of the truck, the calmness in Daniel's voice, and how safe she felt for the first time in hours. It had been a fleeting moment, yet it had made a lasting impression. Life, however, continued without them crossing paths again. Daniel focused on home, work, and parenting. Riley focused on her duties and the small ways she could help others. Both carried the memory of that night silently, like a small, unspoken thread connecting them across the distance. As weeks turned into months, Daniel faced more challenges. One day, his truck broke down on the way home from work. It was the same old truck that had carried him and Lily through countless trips, errands, and small adventures. Standing beside it in the heat of the afternoon, he sighed, thinking about the repairs he could barely afford. Lily watched from the sidewalk, concerned. "Don't worry, kiddo," he said with a tired smile. "We'll figure out." The moment reminded him of that rainy night, when he had stopped to help someone else, even though he had little to spare. The memory of Riley's grateful eyes made him feel that small acts mattered, no matter how tired or stretched thin one might be. Riley, during that same period, was dealing with her own set of challenges. Training new recruits brought unexpected difficulties, and some days were emotionally draining. Yet, she always found small moments to pause and reflect. Sometimes she would think about Daniel and the warmth of his gesture on that rainy night. It reminded her that kindness could ripple through life, even when unnoticed, and gave her the strength to continue serving and helping others in her own way. One weekend, Daniel and Lily went to the local park, a rare moment of calm in their busy lives. Lily ran ahead to feed the ducks, her laughter carrying through the crisp air. Daniel watched her, heart swelling with love, feeling the weight of responsibility lighten just a little. He remembered telling her about helping strangers and how important it was to be kind. Seeing her joy in the simple moment made him realize that life, despite its struggles, was full of small, beautiful experiences worth cherishing. Riley, in her downtime at the base, volunteered to organize a small community event for the local children. She distributed supplies, listened to their stories, and shared a few laughs. It reminded her of how meaningful small gestures could be. That night, she thought about Daniel again, wondering if he was managing well, if life had been kind to him, and if he remembered the rainy night as vividly as she did. In the quiet of their separate lives, Daniel and Riley continued to live, work, and care for those around them. Neither knew that the memory of that night was quietly preparing both of them for a future meeting that would change everything. A small act of kindness had become a seed, quietly growing in both hearts, waiting for the right moment to bloom. As winter approached, the nights grew longer and colder. Daniel spent more evenings reading to Lily by the fireplace, sharing stories, and teaching her about the world around them. He felt the weight of loneliness at times, missing the companionship of someone who understood the complexities of life. But he remained focused on Lily, determined to provide love and stability. Riley, too, found solace in quiet moments. She would take a walk after long days, letting her mind wander and reflect on the past months. The memory of that rainy night, Daniel's calm demeanor, and the simple act of helping someone in need continued to resonate with her. It reminded her that people could make a difference in subtle ways, even without recognition or reward. Both Daniel and Riley, though separated by distance and circumstance, carried the same lesson in their hearts, that small acts of kindness could have lasting impacts. They lived their days with awareness, trying to extend the same compassion they had received to others around them. And though neither knew it yet, the universe had a way of bringing people back together when the time was right. Daniel, sitting at the kitchen table late one night, reflected on the months since that rainy night. He thought about how fleeting moments could leave lasting impressions. The memory of helping Riley had stayed with him, quietly influencing how he approached his life, his parenting, and his interactions with others. It had reinforced his belief in the importance of being present, attentive, and compassionate. Riley, lying in her bunk, thought about how that single act of kindness had given her a sense of hope and humanity during challenging times. It reminded her that even amidst the strictness and discipline of military life, there were moments of genuine connection and warmth that could leave a lasting mark. As the winter months approached, both Daniel and Riley continued their separate lives, unaware that the threads of their stories were slowly weaving together. The memory of that rainy night had become a silent companion, a quiet reminder that their lives were connected in ways they could not yet see. And though they faced struggles, uncertainties, and challenges, they carried with them the knowledge that even small gestures could change lives in ways beyond imagination. The following months have been quiet, yet full of small, meaningful moments for both Daniel and Riley. Daniel continued to juggle the responsibilities of parenting and work, finding comfort in routines and the little victories that life offered. Lily had grown more curious and talkative, often asking questions about the world and sharing every tiny detail of her day. Daniel listened, laughed, and sometimes sighed with exhaustion, but he cherished the time spent with her. He knew that the days he spent raising her were precious, and he wanted every moment to count. Riley, meanwhile, had been assigned to a temporary project at her base that required her to spend more time off-site, working with local community organizations. Her focus was on helping families who struggle with basic needs, organizing resources, and sometimes simply listening to people's stories. These small acts of service reminded her of that rainy night on the highway, when a stranger's help had meant more than words could express. She often reflected on how much that moment had shaped her perspective, teaching her to value empathy and human connection. One chilly evening, Daniel had finished putting Lily to bed. He lingered for a moment, watching her sleep, feeling a quiet mix of exhaustion and gratitude. After years of facing life's challenges alone, he often wondered how different life might have been if he had someone to share these responsibilities with. The thought of companionship made him feel both wistful and hopeful, though he never expected anything to come of it. For now, his focus remained on keeping Lily safe and happy. At the same time, Riley had returned from a long day organizing supplies for a community event. She walked back to her quarters, her boots soft against the wet pavement, and allowed herself a quiet moment to think. She considered the small ways she could continue to help others and how much the world needed kindness, even when it seemed unnoticed. Her mind wandered briefly to that rainy night, to the man who had stopped, and she smiled softly. There was something reassuring about remembering that someone had acted selflessly, without expectation, even in difficult circumstances. Weeks later, a sudden opportunity arose for Riley to take leave. She had been assigned to assist with a small civilian project in a nearby town, one that required her to stay in the area for a few nights. She arrived at the modest motel where she would be staying, tired from the long drive and the heavy rain that seemed determined to follow her everywhere. Checking in, she noticed the small lobby was quiet, almost empty, aside from a few travelers who were clearly trying to escape the storm outside. As she settled into her room, Riley heard the rain pounding against the windows, a steady rhythm that reminded her of the night she had met Daniel. She smiled faintly, thinking about how far away that moment now seemed, yet how present it still felt in her mind. The night was peaceful, yet charged with a sense of possibility, as if something was about to happen that neither of them could predict. The next day, Riley wandered into the nearby town to run errands for the project. The streets were slick from rain, and the wind carried a chill that made her pull her jacket tighter around her. As she walked past a small cafe, she noticed a familiar face through the window. Her heart skipped a beat. It was him, the man from the highway, sitting at a corner table, sipping coffee and reading a small notebook. It had to be Daniel. The same calm presence, the same look in his eyes that she remembered. For a moment, Riley hesitated. She wondered if she should approach him or let him continue in peace. But something in her chest urged her forward. She pushed the door open, the warm air from the cafe brushing against her cold skin. Daniel looked up from his notebook and, for a brief second, did not recognize her. Then his eyes widened and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "Riley?" he asked, voice filled with surprise. She nodded, smiling in return. "Daniel, I didn't expect to see you here." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down. Please, you got to tell me what brings you to town." Riley took the seat, still a little stunned that this reunion was actually happening. "I'm here for a project with the base, helping some families. It's temporary. I didn't expect to run into you." Daniel shook his head slightly, still smiling. "I guess the universe has its ways of bringing people together. How have you been?" Riley looked out the window at the rain, and then back at him. Busy, tired, and still trying to make a difference. And you? How's life been? Daniel sighed softly, the weight of months of struggles and small victories evident in his expression. It's been challenging, but we're getting by. Lily's growing fast, and she keeps me on my toes. I'm doing my best to keep up with everything. Riley nodded, feeling a mix of admiration and empathy. I can tell. You've done a lot, Daniel. I remember that night on the highway, and I think about it often. You didn't have to stop, but you did. That meant something to me more than I can explain. Daniel felt a warmth in his chest. I remember it too. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just saw someone in trouble and stopped. But hearing you say that, it means a lot. The conversation continued, flowing naturally. They talked about Lily, the small town, their respective challenges, and the little victories that kept them going. Rain continued to fall outside, but inside the cafe, there was a sense of warmth, connection, and understanding. It was as if months of separation had melted away in a few short moments. As the day went on, Daniel suggested taking a walk in a nearby park. The rain had slowed to drizzle, and the air smelled fresh and clean. Lily, of course, was not present, but the thought of bringing her along in the near future was comforting. They walked slowly, talking, laughing at small memories, and sharing thoughts that had been kept in their hearts for months. At one point, Riley stopped and looked at Daniel, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and curiosity. I've often wondered if our paths would cross again, she said quietly. I didn't know how or when, but I hoped. Daniel smiled gently. I thought the same thing. Life has its way of testing patience, but here we are. The moment felt surreal, almost like a scene that had been waiting to unfold for months. The rain, the quiet streets, the soft sounds of footsteps, they all combined to create a sense of timing that was both perfect and unexpected. Two lives, separated for so long, were finally converging in a meaningful way. As the evening approached, they found themselves back at the cafe, sharing a simple meal and continuing their conversation. Riley felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. Daniel, too, felt a lightness in his heart that had been missing during the long, challenging months of solo parenting and work. It was a reminder that life sometimes rewarded patience, kindness, and quiet hope. Before leaving, Riley looked at Daniel with a small, sincere smile. Thank you for stopping that night, for helping me. I don't know if you realize how much it mattered. Daniel shook his head, a little humbled. I just did what anyone would do, but I'm glad it helped, and I'm glad we found each other again. As they parted ways that evening, both felt a quiet anticipation for the future. The memory of that rainy night, once a small, fleeting moment, had transformed into a real-life connection that neither would forget. They knew that this reunion was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that could change their lives in ways they had never imagined. Walking back to their separate accommodations, both Daniel and Riley reflected on how life had a way of bringing the right people together at the right time. It wasn't luck alone. It was timing, circumstances, and the choices made along the way. A simple act of kindness on a rainy night had set everything in motion, quietly shaping the next phase of their lives. As the night settled over the town, rain pattered softly against the windows, and both Daniel and Riley lay in their rooms reflecting on the day's events. There was a sense of hope, possibility, and connection that neither had felt in a long time. The universe had a way of working quietly, bringing people together in unexpected ways, and both understood deep down that their story was far from over. The next morning, Daniel woke up with a sense of calm that he hadn't felt in months. The memory of seeing Riley again, the conversation they had shared, and the walk in the park all lingered in his mind. He got up quietly, careful not to wake Lily, and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. The house smelled warm and comforting, the morning sun shining faintly through the curtains. Despite the challenges ahead, there was a lightness in his heart, a sense that something good was unfolding. Lily, meanwhile, woke up and ran into the kitchen, eyes bright and filled with curiosity. "Dad, can we go to the park today?" she asked, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. Daniel smiled, ruffling her hair. "Maybe later, kiddo. I have a surprise for you." Lily's eyes widened with excitement. She loved surprises, even the small ones. Daniel poured coffee for himself and made a quick breakfast, all while thinking about the events of the previous day. Seeing Riley again had reminded him of the importance of connection, of the impact small acts of kindness could have, and of the possibilities that life still held. Across town, Riley was having her own morning routine. She sat by a small window in her temporary lodging, sipping coffee and reflecting on the reunion from the day before. She thought about Daniel, about the way he had treated her on that rainy night, and about how their chance encounter had grown into something meaningful. The simple act of stopping to help someone had set off a chain of events that had brought them together months later. She smiled, feeling grateful and hopeful. Later that day, Riley went to a nearby community center for the project she was overseeing. She arranged supplies, checked in with the families, and ensured everything was running smoothly. Though busy, her mind wandered back to Daniel, and she found herself thinking about how much their meeting had changed the way she viewed small acts of compassion. She felt motivated to continue helping others, to extend the same kindness that had been shown to her. Daniel, after finishing chores and helping Lily with schoolwork, decided to take a walk into town. He wanted to reflect on the reunion, to enjoy the small sense of peace he had felt after months of stress and uncertainty. As he walked through familiar streets, he noticed a local bakery and decided to stop in for a loaf of bread. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered, and the warmth of the shop welcomed him. While paying for the bread, the shopkeeper mentioned a small program run by a local charity, one that helped families with children who needed extra support. Daniel's ears perked up. He had heard of such programs before, but had never looked into them seriously. This one, however, seemed different. It offered financial assistance, educational resources, and support for parents who were struggling to keep up with daily responsibilities. Daniel thought of Lily, of their challenges, and realized that this could make a real difference. Riley, at the same time, was speaking with a coordinator from the project she was assisting. The coordinator mentioned that the charity was looking for stories of local heroes, people who had acted selflessly and made a difference in someone's life. Riley immediately thought of Daniel. She knew his story, remembered that rainy night vividly, and felt that he deserved recognition for the quiet courage he had shown. She quickly asked for the necessary forms and prepared to nominate him. Days passed, and Daniel submitted an application to charity, hopeful but unsure of what would come of it. Meanwhile, Riley completed the nomination paperwork, detailing Daniel's selfless act and the impact it had not only on her life, but also on the lesson it provided about kindness. The charity was impressed with the story and decided to recognize Daniel as a local hero, offering assistance to support his family. When Daniel received a letter confirming the recognition, he was stunned. Financial support, resources for Lily's education, and other benefits were now available to them. He felt a deep sense of gratitude and relief. The recognition was more than just assistance. It was validation that a small act of kindness had come full circle, that it had been noticed, and that it had returned in a meaningful way. Riley called him that evening to discuss the recognition. Hearing her voice again brought a flood of emotions to Daniel. He thanked her sincerely, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness and effort she had put into the nomination. "I want to make sure you knew how much your help meant," she said gently. "You didn't just help me that night. You reminded me that there are still people who care. I wanted the world to know that, too." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. "I don't know what to say. I just did what anyone would do. But thank you. This changes so much for us." They spoke for a long time, sharing stories, laughing at small memories, and reflecting on how far they had come since that night on the highway. The connection between them grew stronger, grounded in respect, gratitude, and the shared understanding of human kindness. The following weekend, Riley visited Daniel and Lily at their home. She brought small gifts for Lily and spent time getting to know her better. They played board games, read stories, and shared laughter, creating new memories that built on the old ones. The bond between them was evident, warm, and genuine, and Daniel felt a sense of hope and possibility he hadn't felt in a long time. As the evening drew to a close, Riley looked around the small, cozy home and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had helped bring stability and happiness to a family simply by nominating Daniel for recognition. The impact of a single act of kindness had rippled outward in ways she could have never imagined. Daniel, watching Lily fall asleep that night with a small smile on her face, felt a quiet peace settle over him. The struggles, the long nights, and the challenges of single parenting still existed, but now there was a new sense of support, connection, and hope for the future. Life had a way of rewarding patience, compassion, and small gestures, and he felt grateful for every moment. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Riley continued to spend time together, helping each other in small ways, sharing laughter and learning from one another. The recognition from the charity provided stability, but the emotional connection between them became just as meaningful. They both realized that life was not just about overcoming challenges, but also about the relationships and connections that made it worth living. One afternoon, as they sat on a small park bench watching Lily play, Daniel turned to Riley and said, "I never expected that one night in the rain would lead to all this." Riley smiled, her eyes reflecting warmth and understanding. "Neither did I, but it shows that even small actions can change lives in ways we can't predict." Daniel nodded, feeling the truth of her words. The rainy night had been a turning point, a catalyst for change that neither of them had fully realized at the time. Now, it had brought stability, friendship, and a deeper sense of connection to their lives. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the park, Daniel, Riley, and Lily sat together, sharing stories and laughter. The future felt brighter, filled with possibilities, hope, and the certainty that kindness, patience, and compassion had the power to shape lives in profound ways. The story of that rainy night, once a small and fleeting moment, had transformed into a lasting bond, reminding them both that the smallest act of care could lead to life-changing outcomes. And as they walked home together that evening, the world felt just a little warmer, a little kinder, and full of hope for whatever came next.